Harlem, New York. 11:17 a.m. Sunday morning, June 3, 1956. The congregation of Abyssinian Baptist Church spills onto West 138th Street like water finding its level. Sunday service just ended. The air is thick with June heat, church perfume, and the lingering echo of Amazing Grace. Women in pressed white dresses and wide-brimmed hats fan themselves with folded programs. Men in dark suits and narrow ties shake hands on the steps, their voices mixing with the distant sound of jazz bleeding from apartment windows. Children weave between parked Cadillacs and Buicks, their Sunday shoes clicking against concrete that remembers every prayer and every sin committed on this block. Bumpy Johnson stands at the top of the church steps, 43 years old. Cream-colored dress with pearl buttons, white gloves that have never known manual labor. A woman of precision and grace, the wife of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. In Harlem, that name carries the weight of unwritten law. It means protection when the badges fail. It means consequences when respect is forgotten. At 11:18 a.m., a patrol car slides to the curb, not the usual Sunday crawl past the church. A deliberate stop, engine idling, 2 uniforms inside, but only one steps out. Officer Vincent "Vinny" Torino, 29 years old, Italian from the Bronx, been working Harlem for 8 months. He's got that walk. The one that says he forgot this isn't his neighborhood. The one that says his badge makes him bulletproof in a place where badges are just metal and bullets are eternal. Torino walks straight toward May, doesn't excuse himself past the elderly deacon, doesn't acknowledge the women who step aside, just walks with purpose, leather soles announcing his arrival like a drumbeat. He stops 3 feet from her, close enough that she can smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath, close enough that every conversation on those church steps goes silent. Close enough that the children stop running. Bumpy Johnson, he says, not a question, a declaration. Like he's reading from a script someone else wrote. You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The words hang in the June air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Bumpy doesn't move, doesn't speak, just stares at this boy in uniform who just accused the wife of Harlem's most dangerous man of being a drug dealer. In front of her church, on Sunday morning, in front of everyone who matters. She pulls back when he reaches for her arm. Not aggressive, just dignified. The way a woman who has never been arrested pulls back when a stranger tries to touch her on sacred ground. Torino doesn't care about dignity. He grabs her wrist, spins her around, slams her against the church wall, the same wall where a bronze plaque reads, "All are welcome in God's house." He cuffs her, tight. The metal bites into her wrists above the white gloves. Someone gasps. A woman starts crying. The deacon takes 1 step forward before another man grabs his arm and shakes his head. No, not here, not now. They all know the mathematics. Harlem man versus white cop equals 1 outcome, and it won't favor them. Torino walks Bumpy down those church steps. Past the congregation, past the children, past the women in their Sunday hats who will carry this memory to their graves. He puts her in the back of the patrol car like she's common property, like she's not the woman who feeds half of Harlem when they're hungry, like she's not married to the man who keeps this neighborhood breathing when the system tries to suffocate it. The patrol car pulls away at 11:21 a.m. Bumpy sits in the back seat, hands cuffed, head high. She doesn't cry. She doesn't look back. She just stares straight ahead through the wire mesh that separates the guilty from the righteous. 3 blocks away, leaning against a barbershop window, a man in a charcoal suit watches the patrol car disappear around the corner. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson doesn't move, doesn't shout, doesn't chase the car. He just checks his watch and walks into the barbershop to make a phone call. At 4:47 p.m. That same day, Officer Vincent Torino will clock in for his evening shift at the 28th Precinct. At 6:23 p.m., his patrol car will be found idling in an alley off Amsterdam Avenue. Keys in the ignition. Radio still crackling, driver's door open. No blood. No struggle. No officer. By sunrise, Vincent Torino will be a ghost story that precinct captains tell rookie cops as a warning about the difference between having authority and earning respect. The story of how Officer Vincent Torino lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now let's go back to June 3, 1956. The 28th Precinct sits on West 123rd Street like a brick monument to institutional failure. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting harsh shadows across scarred wooden desks. The air carries stale tobacco, dried sweat, and the metallic tang of desperation that seeps into concrete after decades of processing human misery. At 11:34 a.m., Officer Vincent Torino drags Mame Johnson through these doors, his grip on her arm unnecessary and deliberate. She doesn't resist, doesn't speak, just walks with her head level, those white gloves still pristine despite the metal biting into her wrists. Sergeant Walter Kowalski looks up from his paperwork, and his face goes slack. 22 years in uniform have taught him to recognize catastrophic mistakes the moment they walk through his door. He sees Mame Johnson in handcuffs and knows he's watching a young officer sign his own death warrant. Torino announces the arrest like he's won a prize: conspiracy to distribute narcotics. Mame Johnson, wife of Ellsworth Johnson. Kowalski asks for the warrant. Torino doesn't have one. He asks for evidence. Torino says Detective Sullivan is handling it. That name lands in the room like a confession. Sullivan is narcotics. Sullivan is dirty. Sullivan has spent 3 years trying to build a federal case against Bumpy Johnson, and every attempt has collapsed under witnesses who suddenly forget how to speak English. The fingerprinting becomes a ceremony of degradation. Torino forces her to remove those white gloves, exposing hands that have never known handcuffs. He presses each finger into the black ink pad with unnecessary force, rolling them across the card like he's marking territory. The mugshot is worse. Front view. Side view. The placard with her name held beneath her chin. Mame stares directly into the camera. No emotion, no shame. She understands this photograph will be in tomorrow's papers. She understands this is theater designed to provoke her husband into making a mistake. Before charges are filed, before paperwork is complete, Torino makes a phone call from the booking desk. A photographer coming to the precinct, arriving in 30 minutes. Kowalski pulls him aside, speaks with the authority of 2 decades on the force. This is wrong. This woman has no record. This arrest will have consequences beyond department politics. Torino dismisses him with a wave, says Sullivan promised him a detective shield if this operation works. Mame spends 6 hours in holding cell 3. The space reeks of vomit, cheap perfume, and institutional disinfectant failing to mask human desperation. 2 prostitutes and a woman withdrawing from heroin share the cell. They recognize her immediately, press themselves against the far wall, offering respect through distance. No charges are filed, no lawyer arrives, no bail hearing is scheduled. At 5:47 p.m., she's allowed 1 phone call. Sullivan stands by the receiver waiting for her to dial the rhythm club. Waiting for her to scream for Bumpy. She doesn't. Mame Johnson dials her sister in the Bronx. She speaks calmly about dinner arrangements. She denies them the satisfaction of panic, understanding the game better than the men playing it. At 8:23 p.m., bail is posted by a lawyer she's never met. No charges appear on any paperwork. She walks out into the June darkness, still wearing her church dress, those white gloves finally removed to reveal bruises where the handcuffs bit too deep. At 9:06 p.m., 3 miles away at the Rhythm Club, Bumpy Johnson sits over a chessboard with his lieutenant Marcus Webb. A young man in a press suit approaches, leans down, whispers 30 seconds of information. Bumpy doesn't flip the table, doesn't shout. He simply moves his queen across the board. The white king falls with a soft click. He looks at Marcus Webb with eyes that have gone completely flat and says in a voice barely above a whisper, "Find out everything about Officer Vincent Torino." Everything. The precision in those words carries more threat than any scream could contain. Harlem's intelligence network operates like a shadow government built on loyalty and survival. By Monday morning, information flows through invisible arteries faster than any printing press could distribute it. Bellhops at the Teresa Hotel lean into squad cars when off-duty cops arrive seeking discreet company, collecting more than tips from men who forget the help has ears. At the 28th Precinct, janitors push mops past open squad room doors. Their movements deliberate, their minds cataloging case numbers, and the particular arrogance in white voices when they believe themselves untouchable. In dim cop bars along Amsterdam Avenue, bartenders pour rye for badges and loose tongues, memorizing which detectives drink too much, gamble too hard, and talk when they shouldn't. On street corners, shoe-shine boys crouch at the feet of sergeants, their rags working over leather, while their ears process every careless word about operations, arrests, and ambitions. All of them report upward in a silent, efficient chain that would make the FBI envious. By 2:30 a.m. on June 4th, the most valuable intelligence arrives through Officer James Crawford, one of 17 black cops in a department of 24,000. Crawford works the night desk at the 28th Precinct because that's where they warehouse colored officers, away from street patrol where citizens might object to seeing a badge on dark skin. He steps into the back office of Bumpy's legitimate dry cleaning business on Lenox Avenue, rain still dripping from his uniform coat. 3 years ago, his younger brother Raymond faced 10 years in Sing Sing for a robbery he didn't commit. Evidence was planted. Witnesses were purchased. Bumpy made 2 phone calls, and Raymond Crawford walked free with charges dismissed. Some debts are worth honoring, and James Crawford pays his gladly. Crawford slides a manila envelope across a wooden crate, his voice steady and professional. Vincent Anthony Torino, 29 years old. 4 years on the job. Married to Angela Torino, 6 months pregnant with their first child, lives in a walk-up apartment off Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, annual salary of $4,200. The mathematics become clear when Crawford produces the bank records. Torino owes $3,800 to Mickey Torino, an Irish bookmaker with no blood relation but a similar appetite for violence. On May 28th, 6 days before the church arrest, Detective Raymond Sullivan deposited exactly $3,800 into Torino's account, the purchase price for a wife's humiliation. Sullivan has spent 3 years trying to build a federal case against Bumpy, watching every attempt collapse under witnesses who suddenly develop convenient amnesia. He needs a big collar to make captain. He needs Bumpy to retaliate violently against a white police officer. The arrest of Mame Johnson was never about narcotics. It was bait designed to provoke exactly the response that would justify federal intervention. But eliminating a police officer in New York City requires more than motive. It requires permission from men who understand that dead cops bring the kind of heat that burns down entire operations. At 4 a.m., Bumpy sits in the back room of an Italian social club on Pleasant Avenue, the air thick with cigar smoke and old power. Anthony Strollo represents the Genovese family. Carlo Lucchesi speaks for his uncle's interests. These men control police corruption in Manhattan the way other men control real estate, and they understand that Torino's action threatens more than Bumpy's reputation. If Bumpy appears weak, the entire balance of power shifts. Strollo lights a fresh cigar, considers the mathematics of respect versus exposure, and after 7 minutes of calculating silence, grants permission for what they term municipal correction. The condition is absolute: no bodies that trace back to organized crime. The police force will tolerate a disappearance. They will go to war over an execution. Bumpy's response carries the weight of absolute certainty: there won't be a body to trace. The machinery engages in 3 phases. Intelligence has been gathered. Now comes the ultimatum. At 8:47 a.m., Sister Margaret from St. Martin's Community Center knocks on Angela Torino's apartment door in the Bronx. She teaches expectant mothers about infant care, has never met Bumpy Johnson, and doesn't understand why a well-dressed man handed her $50 to deliver a verbal message. She only knows the message must be important. When Vincent answers the door, still in his undershirt, suspicion already rising in his eyes, Sister Margaret recites the words exactly as instructed. Her voice carrying the gentle authority that only nuns possess, Officer Torino touched something sacred. He has 48 hours to transfer out of Harlem. After that, his badge won't protect him from the consequences of his disrespect. She leaves without explanation, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. The door closes. At exactly 9 a.m., the clock begins its countdown toward consequences that will redefine the relationship between law enforcement and respect in Harlem forever. Wednesday evening settles over the Bronx like a held breath. Sister Margaret climbs 3 flights of cracked linoleum, her habit rustling against the narrow stairwell walls. At 6:42 p.m., she knocks on apartment 3B with the gentle authority that only nuns possess. Angela Torino answers, one hand supporting her 6-month belly, exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes. When Vincent appears behind his wife, the nun delivers her message with clinical precision. Officer Torino, you touched something sacred. You have 48 hours to transfer out of Harlem. After that, your badge won't protect you from the consequences of your disrespect. She doesn't wait for questions, simply nods once and disappears down the hallway. Inside, Angela's voice carries the sharp edge of maternal instinct. What did the nun mean about touching something sacred? Why would a woman of God deliver threats to their home? Vincent lies with practiced ease, tells her it's nothing more than a crank threat from some colored criminal whose brother he arrested last month. Angela accepts this explanation because she's pregnant and terrified and wants to believe her husband is the hero he claims to be. At 9:47 p.m., Torino calls Detective Sullivan from a payphone 3 blocks away, his voice carrying concern he won't admit to his wife. Sullivan's laughter crackles through the receiver like broken glass. That monkey won't touch a white cop in 1956, he says, bourbon thick in his voice. The arrogance isn't carelessness, it's strategy. Sullivan has plainclothes officers watching the Rhythm Club, Bumpy's apartment, every known location where business is conducted. He wants Bumpy to make a move. He needs that move to justify the federal case he's been building for 3 years. Thursday morning at roll call, Torino mentions the threat to his partner, trying to sound casual. Officer Dennis O'Malley goes pale, his Irish complexion draining to newspaper gray. O'Malley pulls him aside in the locker room, voice dropping to a whisper. He tells the cautionary tale that circulates among cops who've learned respect. 1951, Officer Patrick Donnelly beat one of Bumpy's numbers runners so badly the kid lost an eye. 3 weeks later, Donnelly's house in Queens caught fire at 3 a.m. Wife and 2 children barely escaped through a second-floor window. Fire marshal ruled it accidental, but Donnelly knew better. He quit the force within a week, moved his family to California, never spoke about Harlem again. O'Malley's advice comes wrapped in genuine concern. Take your wife to her mother's in Albany. Let this cool down. Torino refuses with the stubborn arrogance of men who mistake authority for immunity. He calls Bumpy a colored gangster who wouldn't dare touch real law enforcement. Thursday night, 11:59 p.m., the 48-hour deadline expires with anticlimactic precision. Torino sits at his kitchen table. Service revolver within reach, doors locked, windows checked twice. Nothing happens. No knock at the door, no shadowy figures in the alley below. Just silence and the ordinary night sounds of the Bronx. At 12:47 a.m., he goes to bed thinking he called Bumpy Johnson's bluff, his arrogance intact, his future already written in plans he doesn't understand. Bumpy's revenge was never going to involve a home invasion in the Bronx. The plan requires Torino alive, mobile, and confident enough to report for his Friday shift. Friday, June 8, 1956. Vincent Torino walks into the 28th Precinct at 3:47 p.m., carrying the dangerous confidence of a man who believes he has called death's bluff and won. 48 hours have passed without incident. No midnight visitors, no threatening phone calls, just ordinary silence that he mistakes for victory. He signs the duty roster with flourish, jokes with the desk sergeant about colored gangsters and empty threats, and collects the keys to patrol car number 184. What Torino fails to understand is that in Bumpy Johnson's world, silence is merely the time it takes to load the weapon. The evening shift begins with calculated normalcy. Officer Dennis O'Malley partners with him for their usual route covering Washington Heights down through Harlem. At 5:34 p.m., they respond to a domestic disturbance on 181st Street. A husband shouting over rent money, a wife crying into her apron, neighbors pretending deafness. Standard intervention requiring no arrests, just the weight of authority and stern warnings. The call clears within 20 minutes. At 5:58 p.m., they stop at Murphy's Diner on Broadway, the same establishment they've frequented for months. O'Malley orders his usual corned beef on rye. The coffee arrives in familiar white cups, steam rising like incense. The waitress is the same woman who has served them dozens of times. Nothing appears different because the tasteless powder dissolved in O'Malley's coffee was calibrated by a Cuban pharmacist who understands precise dosages. Enough to produce violent illness, not enough to kill. Bumpy's network operates with surgical precision. At 6:15 p.m., O'Malley's face drains to newspaper gray, sweat beads across his forehead. He doubles over, clutching his stomach as bile rises in his throat. Food poisoning, he gasps, demanding immediate medical attention. Torino drives to Mount Sinai emergency room, helps his partner through the glass doors, watches nurses rush O'Malley toward examination rooms. Department policy frowns on solo patrols, but the streets are familiar, and his arrogance is loud. He radios dispatch at 6:31 p.m., reporting himself back in service alone. This is the precise moment the trap engages. A two-man unit is a fortress. A lone officer is prey. At 6:47 p.m., Torino radios his location, Amsterdam Avenue and 145th Street. His voice carries no concern because he's cruising through Harlem in a marked patrol car, badge gleaming, authority intact. At 7:23 p.m., dispatch crackles with urgency. Suspicious activity reported behind Consolidated Warehouse on 142nd Street. Anonymous caller. No further details. Torino responds immediately, adrenaline spiking. The service alley is narrow, brick walls rising 3 stories on both sides. One way in, one way out. Perfect geometry for what follows. He steps from the patrol car, hand resting on his holster out of habit, not fear. 3 men emerge from shadows with the measured precision of professionals conducting business. No masks. No shouted threats. Just tailored suits and the kind of stillness that signals absolute control. Officer Torino, the tallest one, says, voice carrying the clinical tone of a doctor delivering terminal news. Your shift is over. Permanently. There is no violence, no struggle, no chance for heroics, just the efficient conclusion to a lesson in respect that began 5 days ago on church steps. At 8:15 p.m., dispatch calls for status. Silence. At 8:47 p.m., patrol car 184 is discovered abandoned, engine idling, driver's door hanging open. On the dashboard, folded with geometric precision, sits Bumpy Johnson's church program from the previous Sunday. The message requires no translation. The debt has been acknowledged. The basement beneath Bumpy's legitimate furniture warehouse on 155th Street exists in absolute silence. Concrete walls lined with cork insulation. Single bulb casting harsh shadows across bare floor. Vincent Torino sits bound to a metal chair bolted in place, wrists secured with professional precision, ankles fastened tight. No gag, because screaming in this space is futile. The walls were designed to swallow desperate pleas whole. At 9:34 p.m., Ellsworth Johnson descends wooden stairs alone, each footstep deliberate, announcing the arrival of judgment. He wears a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, silk tie straight, expression carrying the calm of absolute certainty. He pulls a second chair directly across from Torino, close enough that their knees nearly touch, and sits with the measured composure of a professor preparing to deliver a final lecture. You put your hands on my wife, Bumpy says, voice level, clinical, judicial, in front of her church, on a Sunday morning. This isn't interrogation seeking information. Bumpy already knows about the gambling debts, Sullivan's payment, the calculated humiliation. This is education about respect and the mathematics of consequences when sacred boundaries are crossed. While they sit in that basement, Bumpy's network operates with systematic efficiency across Manhattan. At 10:17 p.m., anonymous packages arrive at Internal Affairs containing bank records showing Detective Sullivan's $3,800 payment. Photographs document Torino entering Mickey Torino's betting parlor 17 times in 4 months. Inside his precinct locker, planted evidence accumulates, marked bills from known gambling operations, a ledger detailing fabricated bribes, packets of heroin meant to suggest evidence tampering. By morning, Vincent Torino won't be a missing hero, he'll be a corrupt fugitive who fled prosecution. At 11:47 p.m., Bumpy slides pen and paper across the wooden table between them. Write, he commands. Not about kidnapping, not about this room, about every envelope of cash accepted, every false report filed, every life damaged because Torino believed his uniform transformed cruelty into justice. When Torino refuses, Bumpy's voice carries no anger, just mathematical certainty. His pregnant wife Angela can receive evidence showing her husband as a corrupt cop who abandoned his family in disgrace, or she can collect a widow's pension, believing he died honorably serving the city. The psychological breakdown happens in measured stages. First comes defiance, invoking badge and department authority. Then bargaining, offers to transfer, to disappear, to testify against Sullivan. Finally, complete collapse. Torino's hands shake as he writes, tears dropping onto paper, his confession detailing crimes both real and imagined. Between sentences he begs, voice cracking with desperation, offering to take his family to California, to Mexico, anywhere beyond New York's borders. He swears on his unborn child's life that he'll never speak Bumpy Johnson's name again. Bumpy studies the finished confession with clinical detachment, then looks at the broken man across from him. "The time for leaving was 48 hours ago," he says quietly. "You chose to stay. Now we handle this the permanent way. The execution is professional, no torture, no prolonged suffering designed to satisfy vengeance. Just swift, efficient conclusion, the same precision once used to sign bogus arrest reports, now applied to signing Torino's exit from the world." Before leaving, Bumpy arranges the scene with cold care. On the table next to the lifeless body, he places a pristine white glove, identical to those Mame wore on church steps 5 days ago. Pinned to Torino's uniform shirt, a handwritten note in elegant script: "Respect is non-negotiable." The church remembers everything. Then he turns off the light and closes the door on a lesson that will echo through every precinct in Manhattan for years to come. Vincent Torino ceases to exist in the most literal sense possible. His body is transported to a chemical facility in Red Hook, where industrial acid dissolves bone, tissue, and identity into liquid that flows into the East River with the morning tide. No grave, no remains, no forensic evidence, just complete erasure, as methodical as the arrest that started this sequence 5 days earlier. The NIPD responds with predictable fury. Hundreds of officers flood Harlem, raiding known locations, questioning anyone whose name appears in organized crime files. At 10:06 a.m. On June 11th, Bumpy Johnson is brought to the 28th Precinct for questioning. In the interrogation room, Detective Raymond Sullivan leans forward, desperation replacing his earlier arrogance, and asks where Torino is. Bumpy's response carries surgical precision: "I don't know any Officer Torino. But I know many men who forgot their manners." The statement hangs between them like a philosophical observation about respect and consequences. While Sullivan sweats in that room, Bumpy's network executes the final phase with systematic efficiency. At 11:23 a.m., every major newspaper receives manila envelopes containing Torino's detailed confession, gambling debts, falsified reports, planted evidence, 4 years of systematic corruption. Internal Affairs receives identical packages along with bank records and witness statements. By afternoon, headlines read "Corrupt Cop Flees City Under Investigation," not "Officer Murdered by Gangster." The narrative shifts from martyrdom to disgrace within hours. Detective Sullivan is quietly transferred to Staten Island within a week, his promotion to captain permanently blocked. At the 28th Precinct, a new wariness settles over daily operations like morning fog. Officers who once swaggered through Harlem now walk with measured respect. When Mame Johnson passes on the street, hats are tipped, eyes averted. The charges against her evaporate from the docket with no explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement the arrest ever occurred. For 3 years afterward, no officer arrests anyone connected to Bumpy Johnson without solid evidence, multiple witnesses, and written approval from captains who understand some battles cost more than victory. The following Sunday, Mame Johnson walks up those same Abyssinian Baptist church steps at 11:17 a.m. Same time, same dignity, same cream-colored dress with new white gloves. No patrol car idles at the curb, no officer approaches. The congregation nods respectfully, understanding that something fundamental has shifted in the balance of power between badges and respect. Bumpy Johnson didn't just make a cop disappear. He established that in Harlem, respect isn't granted by municipal authority or uniform. It's earned through actions and enforced through consequences that transcend written law. The church steps on West 138th Street still stand today. Ask the old-timers who remember that June morning in 1956. And they'll tell you those steps witnessed more than an arrest. They witnessed the exact moment when the underworld reminded the system that some lines, once crossed, erase the difference between legal and illegal, right and wrong, justice and revenge.